for years, people, Christians, different ones who feel California's heading in a very wrong direction, have been saying, you watch, there's going to be a big earthquake and California's going to fall into the sea. You watch, California's going to be devastated by an earthquake. And if you go back to the turn of this century, I'll just type in the words, let's see, I'm going to type in the words San Francisco earthquake, okay? San Francisco earthquake, and let's see what comes up. San Francisco earthquake, now there's 1989, etc. There are recent ones now, but 1906, 1906, 80% of the destruction of the buildings in the San Francisco earthquake were caused by the Great Fire. The two tectonic plates that interacted to cause the 1906 San Francisco earthquake were the Pacific Plate, North American Plate. I bring that up because there was a fiery preacher named Maria Woodworth Etter. Some would say her name is pronounced Mariah Woodworth Etter. And she spoke of an earthquake coming to California and devastation, and then you have the San Francisco earthquake not long after. That gets your attention. But can we draw conclusions from the two fairly substantial earthquakes in the last few days, around 7 or higher on the Richter scale? And the question of, will there be more earthquakes like this, or is there a bigger one looming? Is this just natural phenomena? In other words, this is the way it's structured. This is the way California is structured. Under the ground, you've got these plates, and if they shift a certain way, you have an earthquake. There's nothing mystical. There's nothing magical. There's nothing spiritual about it. Or would you say, well, who is it that set that in place in the first place? Who is it that structured the world a certain way? Or you say, look, we don't understand why these things happen, but we believe that God is speaking through everything, that he's sovereign. Or do you say, no, I think it's the devil who wants to destroy lives. Remember, he did terrible things to Job. I imagine that would be the most minority position of those listening and watching today. But what's your take on this? Should we take spiritual stock because of these earthquakes? Should we step back and say, God, are you speaking to the people of California? So, as always, I asked on Twitter for feedback from my followers there. Now, remember, this is not meant to prove anything. This is just meant to solicit opinions, all right? So here's my question on Twitter. Is God trying to get the attention of the people of California through these earthquakes? What's your take? Okay, just leave that up on the screen for a moment. When I say, is God trying to get the attention of the people of California, you might say, well, God is God. He does what he wants to do. Yes, I understand that God is God and he does what he wants to do. But, for example, through the prophet Jeremiah, he said, I'm constantly sending the prophets to you. I'm calling you. I'm calling you. Moses said, if only you would listen to the commandments. You have a similar verse in Isaiah, God saying, if only. In other words, God desires many things, but he doesn't make them happen. He desires that all men would be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth, but he doesn't make that happen. He desires that we would all repent and walk in intimacy with him, but he doesn't make that happen. So by trying, I don't mean that God is beating the air in a futile way and he's trying, but he really can't. No, I mean, is God seeking to work through this? And whether people listen or not is another question. Whether they heed what he's saying or not is another question. Nathan just posted on Facebook, nothing happens outside of the will of God. Many would hold to that same view, saying, well, if there's an earthquake or a hurricane or a beautiful day, that's the doing of God. What happens in the world around us is the doing of God. And that insurance companies that refer to certain things like acts of God, that those are accurate descriptions. Just like a beautiful day is an act of God, a thunderstorm is an act of God. Some would hold to that view. Well, it still doesn't answer the question, is there a divine intent in it? Is God seeking to get the attention of the people of California through the earthquake? So I gave 4 choices. Obviously, how ridiculous. It's a possibility. Who knows? All right, so chew on that for a second. 4 choices. Is God trying to get the attention of the people of California through these earthquakes? What's your take? Obviously. How ridiculous? It's a possibility. Who knows? All right, so here's how it played out. And I'm happy to take your calls, get your input, get your thoughts, and then I'll share mine with you. Obviously, it was 20%. 20%. How ridiculous? 13%. It's a possibility, 44%. And 23% said, who knows? So notice here that 67% combined thought, who can know, or it's a possibility. In other words, not a certain definite response. It was only 33% who had a dogmatic response, either obviously or how ridiculous. I think that's wisdom. All right, we can put the graphic down now. I think that's wisdom. I think that those responses are wise responses. Yes, I could see the obviously part. In other words, California continues to go further and further away from biblical morality and biblical truth and biblical standards, and continues to lurch dangerously further or farther left to the point of openly opposing the faith more and more, and openly opposing religious liberties more and more, wanting to radically indoctrinate the kids in the schools more and more. So when you have these earthquakes, like, well, obviously God's trying to get attention. I could understand that response. How ridiculous, I have a little bit harder time understanding that, because these types of things are literally jolting. These types of things get attention. These types of things make people think and make people wonder. Is it so ridiculous to say that God is speaking through it? Who knows is fair in that we do not have an authoritative Bible telling us this. And we didn't have, for example, major prophetic voices in America, or 30 or 40 solitary prophetic voices across the country, all prophesying. You watch what happens the beginning of July in California. You watch for a series of earthquakes. God's getting the attention of the state and of the nation. That would have been something. But in the absence of that, it's perfectly fair to say, who knows? But the majority view, it's a possibility. To me, that's the wisest view, barring further divine revelation. Why do I say that? When you have, say, a hurricane, a massive act of a massive manifestation of the power of nature. Let's just say that, okay? So whether God's doing it or whether it's the power of nature, which God ultimately created, either way, all right? When you see something happen, that momentous, it is shaking. A massive tornado, it is shaking. The earthquake itself, never been part of an earthquake in terms of anything major on any level, or a tornado where I was really, really close to it. But I've been in a few hurricanes, and it's overwhelming. It's intense. It's devastating. And what it reminds you of immediately is how fragile we are as a human race. That with all of our technology and all of our accomplishments and all that, and galactic travel and etc., we're pretty fragile. I mean, if it just keeps raining and keeps raining and keeps raining, we all die. I mean, that's just the way it is. I remember when Hurricane George came to Pensacola, Florida, and it stalled off the coast and just kept raining and raining and raining. And we had, where we lived right then in Seminole, Alabama, right over the Florida border into Alabama, the Styx River overflowed its banks. It was called a 100-year flood, the type of thing you might not see for a century. And it happened because the hurricane just stayed there, and it kept raining, and it kept raining, and it kept raining. And next thing, houses were underwater. It was devastating. Something like that just keeps happening long enough, we die. So there's something overwhelming about this. And it's the type of thing that gets attention, makes us recognize our frailty, and often causes us to cry out to God. Or it's just like when Rudy Giuliani was running for president. And here he is, Catholic, and he made a pro-abortion statement. And as he makes it, lightning hits the building, and there's a short circuit for a moment. And it got his attention. I mean, he joked about it, but he joked about it in a way where you knew he was serious too. Like, that's a little unnerving. Now, I am not saying that we're supposed to read into every natural disaster and find a spiritual message in it. But certainly, when you have something like this happening, and if the earthquakes keep happening, it is an attention getter. It is an attention getter, and at the very least, should cause people to recognize the frailty of the human race and how we need God. And it should remind us that one day everything is going to be shaken.